The blood-red sunset painted the Montana sky as Nathan Anderson stared at his raw, bleeding hands, wondering if the pain would ever stop not just in his palms, but in his heart. 3 years of working his claim alone had yielded little gold, but plenty of calluses, and the small cabin he'd built felt as empty as the promises that had lured him west in 1874. Nathan wrapped dirty rags around his hands and walked the half-mile back to his homestead, his boots kicking up dust that had once been mud before the 3-month drought. The 17 acres he'd claimed after the war stretched before him: parched land, struggling crops, and a half-built barn that seemed to mock his solitary efforts. At 32, he had nothing to show for his life but blisters and broken dreams. The cabin door creaked open to reveal the same lonely interior he'd left at dawn: a cold hearth, unwashed dishes, and the photograph of his parents who'd died of fever back in Pennsylvania. Nathan slumped into his chair, too tired to even build a fire despite the approaching evening chill. Tomorrow would bring more of the same: digging irrigation trenches to salvage what remained of his corn crop, mending fences, and praying for rain that never seemed to come. Sleep claimed him where he sat, but dawn arrived mercilessly early. Nathan forced himself up, splashed water on his face from the basin, and stepped outside to face another day of back-breaking work. The irrigation ditch wouldn't dig itself, and if he didn't get water to his fields soon, he'd have nothing to harvest come fall. By midday, sweat soaked through his shirt despite the dry heat. The shovel had reopened the cuts on his palms, fresh blood staining the wooden handle. He paused only when the distant sound of wagon wheels broke the silence. Visitors were rare this far from Willow Creek, the nearest town, and Nathan wasn't in the mood for company. The wagon approached slowly, pulled by a weary-looking mare. Nathan squinted against the sun, making out the silhouette of a woman and what appeared to be furniture piled high behind her. She drew the wagon to a halt near his property line. "Excuse me," she called, her voice carrying across the field. "Is this the Anderson homestead?" Nathan set down his shovel and approached, suddenly conscious of his filthy appearance. "It is," he replied cautiously. "I'm Nathan Anderson." The woman stepped down from the wagon with practiced ease, revealing a simple blue dress and a face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. When she looked up, Nathan found himself staring into eyes the color of summer sage. "I'm Tabitha Briggs," she said, extending her hand before noticing his bleeding palms and quickly withdrawing it. "Oh, you're hurt." "It's nothing," Nathan muttered, uncomfortable with her concern. "What brings you out here, Miss Briggs?" She straightened her shoulders. "I believe I'm your new neighbor. I've purchased the Clayton property that borders yours to the east." Nathan frowned. Old Man Clayton had died the previous winter, and his land had sat abandoned for months. "That place is barely standing. No offense, but it's not fit for a woman alone." A flash of determination crossed her face. "I'm not asking for your approval, Mr. Anderson. I'm simply making introductions as any decent neighbor would." Something in her tone, pride mixed with vulnerability, made Nathan regret his words. "I apologize. That was uncalled for." He gestured to her wagon. "You've got quite a load there." "Everything I own," she replied, her expression softening slightly. "Would you know of anyone who might help me unload? I can pay." Nathan glanced at his unfinished irrigation ditch, then back at Tabitha Briggs with her wagon full of hope and determination. His hands throbbed painfully beneath their bloody wrappings. "I can help," he said, surprising himself. "No payment necessary. That's what neighbors do." The relief on her face was immediate. "Thank you. I wouldn't ask, but some things are too heavy for me to manage alone." For the next 3 hours, Nathan carried furniture into the dilapidated Clayton house. It was worse than he remembered: roof leaking in 2 places, porch steps rotted through, and windows cracked from winter storms. Yet Tabitha directed the placement of each piece with the certainty of someone who saw potential where others saw ruin. "Why here?" Nathan finally asked as they unloaded the last trunk. "There's better land closer to town." Tabitha paused, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her forehead. "This was what I could afford. My husband died 2 years ago in St. Louis, left me with debts and not much else." She spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "I sold everything to start fresh somewhere new. Somewhere mine." Nathan nodded, understanding all too well the need to claim something as your own. "It won't be easy." "Few worthwhile things are," she replied. When the wagon was empty, Nathan reluctantly prepared to leave. "If you need anything." "I'll manage," she interrupted, then softened. "But thank you. Your hands need tending. There's a salve my grandmother taught me to make. I could show you if you'd like to come for supper tomorrow. As thanks." Nathan hesitated, unaccustomed to such offers. "I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition if I'm inviting you," she said, with the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Besides, I suspect we could both use the company." That night, Nathan lay awake longer than usual, thinking about Tabitha Briggs and her quiet determination. He told himself his restlessness was due to his painful hands, not the prospect of supper with a female neighbor with intelligent eyes and capable hands. The next day passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Nathan actually shaved, something he rarely bothered with, and put on his cleanest shirt before walking the half-mile to the Clayton, now the Briggs property, as the sun began its descent. He found Tabitha on her hands and knees, scrubbing the cabin's wooden floor. She looked up at his knock, wiping sweat from her brow. "Mr. Anderson, come in. I'm just finishing." "Nathan," he corrected. "Mr. Anderson was my father." She nodded, standing to smooth her skirts. "Then I'm Tabitha." The interior of the cabin had been transformed. Though still humble, it was spotlessly clean, with cheerful curtains at the windows and a vase of wildflowers on the table. The aroma of stew simmering over the fire made Nathan's stomach growl embarrassingly. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to the table. "Let me see those hands first." Nathan obediently sat while Tabitha brought a small pot of greenish salve and clean bandages. She pulled her chair close to his and gently unwrapped his crude dressings. Her touch was firm but tender, professional, yet somehow intimate. "These need proper care," she chided softly. "Infection is no small matter out here." "Haven't had anyone to fuss over them," he admitted, then added hastily, "Not that you're fussing." A small smile played at her lips. "Oh, I'm definitely fussing, Nathan. Hold still." The salve stung initially, then brought blessed relief. As she wrapped clean bandages around his palms, Nathan studied her face. She was older than he'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 29, with fine lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. "You've done this before," he observed. "My husband was a carpenter. His hands were always getting splinters and cuts." Her voice held no trace of sadness, just matter-of-fact acceptance. "And before that, I helped my father in his medical practice." "You're a doctor's daughter?" She nodded. "Not that it matters much out here, but I know my way around basic treatments." Over supper rabbit stew with wild onions and the last of her journey bread, Tabitha explained her plans. She intended to plant vegetables, keep chickens, and eventually establish an herb garden that might provide medicines for the scattered homesteads in the area. "The land needs water," Nathan said, thinking of his own struggling fields. "I've been digging irrigation from the creek, but it's slow going." "I noticed your work," she replied. "Ambitious for one man." "Necessary," he corrected. "Without it, nothing grows." When the meal ended, Nathan found himself reluctant to leave. It had been so long since he'd enjoyed conversation over a hot meal that wasn't his own poor cooking. I should let you rest, he finally said, rising. Thank you for supper. And for this. He held up his bandaged hands. Will you come back in 3 days? Those dressings will need changing. Nathan knew he could change his own bandages, yet he found himself nodding. 3 days. Walking home under a star-filled sky, Nathan realized he was looking forward to something for the first time in years. The days that followed established a new rhythm to Nathan's life. He worked from dawn until dusk, but his labor now had purpose beyond mere survival. He found himself making improvements to his cabin, fixing the sagging front step, patching the roof, even building a proper chair to replace the crude stool at his table. True to his word, he returned to Tabitha's after 3 days, and then again after another 3. Their conversations grew easier, spanning from practical matters of homesteading to more personal histories. He learned she was the daughter of a widowed doctor who'd raised her among his medical books and patients. She'd married young to Thomas Briggs, a skilled craftsman whose dreams had exceeded his business sense. He wasn't a bad man, she explained one evening as they sat on her newly repaired porch. Just restless, always chasing the next opportunity while letting the current one slip through his fingers. Is that why you came west? To stop chasing? Tabitha considered this. I suppose I came to plant roots deep enough that they couldn't be easily uprooted again. July brought blistering heat and still no rain. Nathan's irrigation ditch progressed slowly, hindered by the rocky soil and his still healing hands. One particularly brutal afternoon, as he contemplated the futility of his efforts, the sound of approaching footsteps made him look up. Tabitha stood there with a water jug and a determined expression. Without a word, she handed him the jug, then picked up a spare shovel. What are you doing? He asked after gratefully drinking. Helping, she replied simply and began to dig. This isn't women's work, Nathan protested weakly. Tabitha gave him a look that silenced further objections. Is it your work because you're a man, or because this land is yours to care for? Before he could answer, she continued, My land needs water too. This creek runs between our properties. It seems to me this is precisely my work. They worked side by side until sunset, achieving more progress in one afternoon than Nathan had managed in 3 days alone. As they walked back toward their respective cabins, exhausted but satisfied, Tabitha suddenly stopped. Look, she whispered. On the horizon, dark clouds were gathering. The air had changed, carrying the unmistakable scent of approaching rain. It might miss us, Nathan cautioned, not wanting to hope. Or it might not, Tabitha replied. Either way, we're ready for it now. The rain came at midnight, a drenching downpour that Nathan stood in for several minutes, face upturned, letting it wash away weeks of dust and despair. By morning, the irrigation ditch was flowing perfectly, carrying life-giving water to both their properties. August brought a cautious flourishing to their combined efforts. Nathan's corn began to recover, and Tabitha's vegetable garden sprouted promising rows of green. They fell into a pattern of shared meals 3 times a week, alternating between their cabins. Nathan found himself looking forward to these evenings with an intensity that both pleased and frightened him. One Sunday, Nathan rode into Willow Creek for supplies and returned with something wrapped carefully in paper. What's this? Tabitha asked when he presented it to her that evening. Open it and see, he replied, uncharacteristically nervous. Inside was a book of poetry by Walt Whitman. Tabitha's eyes widened as she gently touched the cover. I remembered you saying your mother used to read poetry to you, Nathan explained hastily. The general store had this. If you don't like it... It's perfect, she interrupted, her voice soft. No one has given me a gift in a very long time. That night, after a simple supper, they sat side by side on Tabitha's porch while she read aloud. Nathan, who had never given much thought to poetry, found himself entranced not just by the words, but by the way her voice gave them life. and by the peaceful expression on her face as she read. When it grew too dark to see the pages, Tabitha closed the book with reluctance. "Thank you," she said again, "for remembering something so small." "It doesn't seem small," Nathan replied. "Not if it matters to you." Their gazes held for a moment too long before Tabitha looked away, a flush coloring her cheeks. "It's getting late." Nathan stood, suddenly aware of a tension between them that hadn't been there before. "I should go." "Nathan," she said as he reached the bottom step. When he turned, she seemed to be struggling with her words. Would you like to come to church with me on Sunday? In town?" The invitation surprised him. Nathan hadn't set foot in a church since before the war. "I'm not much for religion these days." "Neither am I," she admitted. "But I thought it might be nice not to ride into town alone." Understanding dawned. She wasn't asking him to church, she was asking him to accompany her in public, to stand beside her before the curious eyes of Willow Creek. It was a step beyond their private friendship. "I'd be honored," he said. Sunday morning found Nathan nervously adjusting his one good shirt as he hitched his horse to his rarely used buggy. He'd spent the previous day cleaning and repairing it, even oiling the leather seats. When he arrived at Tabitha's cabin, she emerged wearing a dress he hadn't seen before, pale yellow with tiny flowers embroidered along the collar. "You look beautiful," he said before he could stop himself. Her smile was worth his momentary embarrassment. "And you clean up quite nicely yourself, Mr. Anderson." The 12-mile journey to town passed pleasantly, filled with conversation and comfortable silences. As they approached Willow Creek, however, Nathan sensed Tabitha tensing beside him. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Just nervous," she admitted. "I haven't really met anyone in town yet, except the shopkeeper." Nathan understood her anxiety. Small towns thrived on gossip, and a widow arriving alone had undoubtedly sparked speculation. Her appearing now with him would create even more. "We don't have to do this," he offered. Tabitha straightened her shoulders. "Yes, we do. I didn't come west to hide." The small church was nearly full when they arrived. Heads turned as Nathan escorted Tabitha down the aisle to an empty pew near the back. He was acutely aware of the whispers, the curious glances, but focused instead on the warm pressure of Tabitha's hand on his arm. After the service, they endured the expected barrage of introductions and barely disguised inquiries. Nathan found himself standing protectively close to Tabitha as she fielded questions about her arrival and plans. She handled the attention with grace, neither confirming nor denying the assumptions about their relationship that hung in the air. "Miss Briggs, what a pleasure to finally meet you." The booming voice belonged to Willow Creek's mayor, Harold Wilson, a corpulent man whose expensive suit strained at the buttons. Nathan immediately disliked the proprietary way Wilson looked at Tabitha. "Mayor Wilson?" Tabitha acknowledged with a polite nod. "I've been meaning to ride out and welcome you properly," Wilson continued, ignoring Nathan completely. "A lady alone shouldn't have to struggle with such a remote property. In fact, I have several excellent lots in town that would be much more suitable for someone of your delicate constitution." Nathan felt Tabitha stiffen beside him. "That's very thoughtful," she replied coolly, "but I'm quite content with my home, and I'm hardly alone, as you can see." Wilson's gaze flicked dismissively to Nathan. "Anderson's place isn't much better, barely producing enough to pay taxes from what I hear." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Between us, the bank's considering calling in several loans on underperforming properties in the area. Difficult times require difficult decisions." The threat was thinly veiled. Nathan's mortgage was through Wilson's bank, and while he'd never missed a payment, the terms allowed for reassessment if the land wasn't considered productive. "Our properties are doing just fine," Nathan said evenly, fighting to control his anger. "Better every day." "Is that so?" Wilson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, I'll have to ride out and see these improvements for myself. Soon. As they drove home, Nathan's hands gripped the reins so tightly that his knuckles showed white. That man is trouble, he muttered. He's a bully, Tabitha agreed, and he has his eye on our land. But why? Nathan had been asking himself the same question. Their properties weren't particularly fertile compared to others in the area, and they were far from town. The creek, he realized suddenly. It's the only water source that doesn't dry up, even in drought years. If Wilson controls it, he controls who gets water. Tabitha's expression darkened. He can't just take our land. No, but he can make it impossible for us to keep it. Nathan sighed heavily. The bank could raise my payments, claim I'm not meeting the terms. And you. I bought my land outright, Tabitha interrupted. He can't touch it. Nathan looked at her in surprise. How? Everything I had? She said simply. Every penny from selling my husband's shop and our home. I didn't want any debts hanging over my head again. Relief washed over Nathan, followed immediately by concern. Then he'll focus on forcing me out first. The following week brought Wilson's promised visit. The mayor arrived with 2 other men from town, ostensibly to inspect Nathan's progress, but clearly looking for deficiencies to report. Nathan showed them the irrigation system, the recovering corn, the repaired fences, all evidence of a functioning farm. Wilson seemed disappointed by the improvements. Seems you've been busy, he commented sourly. With help, I notice. He nodded toward Tabitha's property, where she could be seen working in her garden. Neighbors help each other, Nathan replied neutrally. Is that all she is? A neighbor? Wilson's implication was clear. Nathan met his gaze steadily. Miss Briggs is a respected friend and a hard-working landowner. I'd appreciate you speaking of her with the respect she deserves. Wilson's eyes narrowed. Careful, Anderson. You're in no position to make demands. He mounted his horse. I'll be watching your progress. One bad season, one missed payment, and this land will have a new owner. After they departed, Nathan walked to the property line where Tabitha was waiting, her face concerned. What did they want? She asked. Exactly what we thought. Wilson's looking for any excuse to foreclose. Tabitha's jaw set determinedly. Then we don't give him one. We make this land so productive he can't possibly claim it's failing. The harvest season approached with both promise and pressure. Nathan and Tabitha worked from sunrise until well after dark, preparing for what might be their only chance to prove Wilson wrong. Their evening meals became strategy sessions, planning crops for maximum yield and discussing ways to improve their modest operations. One night, as they sat at Nathan's table reviewing figures, Tabitha suddenly placed her hand over his. We're going to survive this, she said with quiet certainty. Nathan looked at their joined hands, his calloused and strong, hers equally work-worn but smaller. The simple touch sent warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. Tabitha, he began, then faltered, unsure how to express the feelings that had been growing inside him for months. She waited, her eyes searching his face. When he didn't continue, she slowly withdrew her hand. It's late. I should go. Stay, he said abruptly, then immediately flushed at how it sounded. I mean not. I just meant it's dark, and the path is rough, and... A small smile touched her lips. I know what you meant, Nathan, but I can find my way home. I always have. After she left, Nathan paced his cabin, angry at his clumsiness, at his inability to say what he truly meant. When had he become such a coward? He'd faced bullets in the war with less fear than he felt at the prospect of telling Tabitha Briggs how he felt about her. The harvest began in late September. Nathan's corn crop, while not abundant, was respectable enough to meet his loan payments and provide seed for the following year. Tabitha's garden had yielded well, and her chickens were laying steadily. They worked side by side, bringing in the crops and preserving what they could for winter. One crisp morning, as they loaded the last of Nathan's corn onto his wagon for the trip to market, he finally found his courage. "I want you to know," he said, not looking directly at her, "that whatever happens with Wilson and the bank, I'm glad you came here. My life is better for having you in it." Tabitha stood very still, her eyes wide with surprise. "Nathan, you don't have to say anything," he continued hurriedly. "I just needed to tell you that. Before winter comes and we're all shut in. Before anything changes." She stepped closer, her face serious. "What if I want things to change?" His heart hammered in his chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said carefully, "that I didn't expect to find someone like you when I came west. Someone who works until his hands bleed to make something grow. Someone who sees me as more than just a widow or a woman alone." She took a deep breath. "I've been alone for a long time, Nathan. I thought that was what I wanted. Now I'm not so sure." Hope bloomed in Nathan's chest, fragile but undeniable. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "I'm not good with words, Tabitha, but I know that when I'm with you, everything makes sense. The work doesn't seem so hard. The future doesn't seem so empty." Her smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "That's poetry enough for me." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been before, familiar and new all at once. Her arms went around his neck, drawing him closer, and Nathan knew with absolute certainty that whatever battles lay ahead with Wilson and the bank, they would face them together. The trip to market was successful. Nathan's corn fetched a fair price, enough to make his bank payment with a small amount left over. As they drove back, plans for the future spilled out between them. They talked of combining their efforts more formally, of improvements they could make together that neither could manage alone. "Nathan," Tabitha said suddenly as they approached their properties. "Look." 3 riders were visible near her cabin. Even from a distance, Nathan recognized Mayor Wilson's portly figure. "What's he doing on your land?" Nathan muttered, urging the horses faster. They arrived to find Wilson and his companions examining Tabitha's property boundaries, consulting a map, and driving stakes into the ground. "What's the meaning of this?" Tabitha demanded, jumping down from the wagon before Nathan could stop her. Wilson turned, his expression falsely pleasant. "Ah, Miss Briggs, just the person I wanted to see. There seems to be a discrepancy with your property lines." "There's no discrepancy," she replied coldly. "I purchased the Clayton property in its entirety, with clear boundaries." Wilson produced a document from his coat. "According to county records, the eastern section, including the creek access, actually belongs to the town's water rights. Old Clayton never had claim to it." Nathan stepped forward. "That's impossible. Clayton worked that land for 20 years without dispute." "By oversight, not by right," Wilson countered smugly. "Now that the area is developing, the town council is simply reclaiming what legally belongs to Willow Creek." It was a transparent ploy, but one with potentially devastating consequences. Without creek access, Tabitha's land would be nearly worthless. "I have the deed," Tabitha said firmly. "It clearly states the boundaries include the creek." "Deeds can be incorrect," Wilson replied. "The county records are what matter legally. I'm afraid this portion—" He gestured to nearly a third of her property, including the vital water access, "will need to be surrendered to town control." Nathan saw the flash of fear in Tabitha's eyes, quickly replaced by determination. "I'll fight this," she stated. "By all means," Wilson agreed pleasantly. "Get a lawyer, take it to court. Of course, legal matters can drag on for months, even years, and you'll need water in the meantime." His smile turned predatory. "The town would be happy to sell you water rights at a reasonable rate." After Wilson and his men departed, Tabitha stood staring at the stakes they'd driven to mark their claim. "He can't do this," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Nathan put his arm around her shoulders. We'll fight it. Together. That evening, they spread Tabitha's deed on her table, examining every word. The boundaries were clearly defined and included the creek, just as she'd said. But if Wilson had managed to alter the county records, it would be her word against his, and in Willow Creek, Wilson's word carried more weight. We need proof that Clayton always used that land, Nathan said. Witnesses, old documents, anything. Who would know? Tabitha asked. Clayton lived alone, and most of his contemporaries are gone. Nathan thought for a moment. Judge Peabody might remember. He's been in Willow Creek longer than anyone. The elderly judge received them the next day in his small office behind the courthouse. His roomy eyes brightened with interest as they explained their predicament. Wilson's overreaching again, he muttered. Not the first time. He shuffled through a cabinet of documents, finally extracting a leather-bound book. Original township plats? Let's see about Clayton's place. The judge's gnarled finger traced the yellowed page. Here we are. 1851. Original grant to Elijah Clayton includes water rights to the eastern branch of Willow Creek, extending to the natural ridge. He looked up triumphantly. Just as your deed states, Miss Briggs. Relief washed over them both. So Wilson is wrong, Tabitha said. The county records support my claim. Judge Peabody's expression dimmed. Not exactly. These are the original records. The current county records are maintained by the town clerk who happens to be Wilson's nephew. So Wilson altered the records, Nathan concluded grimly. I can't prove that, Judge Peabody cautioned, but I can authenticate this original document, whether that's enough to stop Wilson. He shrugged his bony shoulders. Armed with a certified copy of the original plat, Nathan and Tabitha confronted Wilson at the bank the next day. The mayor's face darkened as he examined Judge Peabody's documentation. This changes nothing, he insisted. The current records stand until proven otherwise in court. And as I mentioned, legal proceedings take time and money, both of which I suspect you lack. We have the truth, Tabitha countered. Wilson laughed coldly. Truth is a luxury, Miss Briggs. Power is what matters. And in Willow Creek, I have the power. He leaned forward. However, I'm not unreasonable. I might consider dropping this matter if you were to sell your property to me, at a fair price. So that's what this is about, Nathan said. You're trying to force her to sell. Business is business, Wilson replied with a shrug. Think about it, Miss Briggs. A widow alone, facing winter with uncertain water access and legal troubles? Or a comfortable sum in your pocket and the freedom to go wherever you please? His eyes shifted to Nathan. Perhaps with companionship. Tabitha stood, her back ramrod straight. My answer is no, Mayor Wilson. That land is mine, legally and rightfully. I won't be bullied into selling. Outside the bank, Tabitha's composed facade crumbled slightly. What now? She asked quietly. Nathan took her hand. Now we find a lawyer who isn't afraid of Wilson, and we prepare for winter as best we can. The first snow fell in early November, dusting the landscape in white. Despite Wilson's threats, no official action had been taken to restrict Tabitha's access to the creek, though surveyors had returned several times to check the boundary markers. Their lawyer, a young man from the next county over, was cautiously optimistic about their case, but warned that proceedings wouldn't begin until spring. In the meantime, Nathan and Tabitha continued their daily routines, drawing strength from each other's company. One evening, as they sat by Tabitha's fire drinking coffee, Nathan cleared his throat nervously. I've been thinking, he began. A dangerous pastime, she teased gently. He smiled but continued seriously. About us. About the future. He set down his cup and took her hands in his. I know we haven't known each other that long, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life without realizing it. Tabitha's eyes widened. Nathan, let me finish, please. he said softly. I love you, Tabitha. I think I started falling in love with you that first day, when you showed up with your wagon full of furniture and determination. And every day since then, that feeling has only grown stronger. Tears glistened in her eyes. I love you too, she whispered. More than I thought possible. Then marry me, Nathan said simply. Not just because of Wilson or the land or the coming winter. Marry me because when I'm with you, my home feels alive again. Marry me because I want to build a life with you, whatever challenges come our way. Tabitha's smile was radiant through her tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. They were wed the following Sunday in Willow Creek's small church, with Judge Peabody and a few friendly townspeople as witnesses. Wilson was conspicuously absent, though his absence felt more like a threat than a relief. That night, in Nathan's cabin now, their cabin, they lay tangled together beneath patchwork quilts, the winter wind howling outside unheeded. Tabitha's head rested on Nathan's chest, her finger tracing the scars from his war injuries. What are you thinking? He asked, stroking her auburn hair, still amazed that she was truly his wife. That I've never felt so safe, she answered. Or so loved. Nathan pulled her closer. I'll always keep you safe, no matter what Wilson tries. December brought heavy snows and bitter cold. Their two cabins they'd decided to maintain both, until the boundary dispute was resolved, stood like twin beacons in the white landscape, connected by a path Nathan diligently kept shoveled. They spent most nights in Nathan's larger cabin, but used Tabitha's for her growing collection of dried herbs and medicines. As winter deepened, more of Willow Creek's residents fell ill with influenza. Word reached them through the occasional traveler that the town doctor was overwhelmed. When Tabitha heard that several children had died, she couldn't remain idle. I need to help, she told Nathan one morning. I have medicines that might save lives. Nathan knew better than to argue. I'll hitch the sleigh. In town, they found chaos. Nearly half the residents were sick, and Dr. Simmons was himself bedridden with fever. The mayor's house had been converted to a makeshift hospital, where Wilson's wife supervised care with more authority than skill. Tabitha immediately went to work, organizing treatments and preparing remedies from her supplies. Nathan assisted as best he could, fetching water and firewood, helping move patients, and following Tabitha's instructions precisely. For 3 days and nights, they barely slept. Tabitha moved from bedside to bedside, her touch gentle but sure, her voice calm even when exhaustion threatened to overcome her. Nathan watched in awe as his wife, this remarkable woman he was still getting to know, saved lives with knowledge passed down from her father and her own careful observations. On the 4th day, Wilson himself appeared in the doorway of the sick room. His face was gray with fatigue, his usual pomposity diminished by worry. My daughter, he said without preamble, addressing Tabitha directly. She's taken ill. My wife says. She says it's bad. Tabitha didn't hesitate. Take me to her. 12-year-old Eleanor Wilson lay burning with fever in her bedroom, her breathing labored and her small face flushed. Tabitha examined her quickly, then turned to Nathan. I need willow bark tea and the honey mixture from my bag, and cool compresses. While Nathan gathered the supplies, he overheard Wilson speaking to Tabitha in uncharacteristically humble tones. Can you? I'll do everything I can, Tabitha promised, her voice kind despite everything Wilson had done to them. She's young and strong. That gives her a good chance. Throughout that night, Tabitha fought for Eleanor's life with the same determination she'd brought to every challenge since arriving in Montana. Nathan remained by her side, supporting her with quiet strength and unquestioning assistance. Near dawn, the girl's fever finally broke. Tabitha sagged with relief, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. Nathan caught her, guiding her to a chair. She'll recover now, Tabitha told Wilson, who had refused to leave his daughter's side. She needs rest and plenty of fluids, but the worst is past. Wilson stared at them both, something unfamiliar in his expression. I don't understand, he finally said. After everything, why would you help us? Tabitha met his gaze steadily. Because it's the right thing to do. Because your daughter deserves to live, regardless of her father's actions. Wilson looked away first. Thank you, he said, the words seemingly difficult for him. I'm in your debt. Remember that, Nathan said quietly, when spring comes and you're deciding whether to honor the rightful boundaries of our land. The influenza epidemic gradually subsided as January turned to February. Tabitha continued to visit the sick in town once a week, her reputation as a healer growing with each recovery. Nathan used the quieter winter days to plan improvements for their combined properties, assuming perhaps optimistically that the boundary dispute would be resolved in their favor. One bitter, cold evening in late February, a pounding at their door startled them both. Nathan opened it to find Mayor Wilson, his horse steaming in the frigid air. Mayor, Nathan acknowledged cautiously, allowing him inside. Wilson stamped snow from his boots, his expression uncomfortable. Anderson, Mrs. Anderson. He nodded to Tabitha. I've come with news. They waited, tense with anticipation. Wilson cleared his throat. The town council met yesterday. We voted to recognize the original property boundaries as documented in Judge Peabody's records. He produced an official-looking paper. This certifies that the eastern section of your property, including creek access, belongs rightfully to you, Mrs. Anderson. The disputed markers will be removed at the earliest opportunity. Tabitha took the document with trembling hands. Why the change of heart? Wilson shifted his considerable weight. Let's just say recent events have adjusted my perspective. A man reconsiders his priorities when his child's life hangs in the balance. He paused, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say next. I've also instructed the bank to modify your loan terms, Anderson. The new agreement provides more favorable interest and extended payment periods. You'll receive the paperwork next week. Nathan could hardly believe what he was hearing. That's generous of you. It's the least I can do, Wilson replied, a hint of his old bluster returning. Willow Creek needs successful farms, after all. Bad for business otherwise. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Mrs. Anderson, Eleanor asks about you. Perhaps you might visit sometime. She's interested in your medicines. Tabitha smiled warmly. I'd be delighted to teach her what I know. After Wilson departed, Nathan and Tabitha stood in stunned silence before breaking into relieved laughter. Did that really just happen? Nathan asked, pulling Tabitha into his arms. It seems even Harold Wilson has a heart, she replied, leaning against him, hidden deep beneath all that ambition and pride. Or perhaps he finally realized he'd met his match in you, Nathan suggested, kissing her forehead. My brave, brilliant wife. March brought the first hints of spring patches of earth emerging from melting snow, the creek running full with snowmelt, and birds returning to nest in the eaves of their cabins. One morning, Tabitha announced she had something to show Nathan. She led him to her cabin, now primarily used for her growing medical practice. Inside, she opened a trunk he hadn't seen before. I've been saving this, she explained, lifting out a carefully folded quilt. My mother made it for my hope chest when I was a girl. I thought perhaps... She unfolded it to reveal intricate patterns in soft blues and greens. It's beautiful, Nathan said, touched that she would share this piece of her past with him. I thought it might be nice in a nursery, Tabitha continued, watching his face closely. Someday. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. Someday soon? Her smile was answer enough. If all goes well, by next winter. Joy unlike anything Nathan had ever known surged through him. He gathered Tabitha in his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around until they were both dizzy with laughter. "Are you happy?" she asked when he finally set her down. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he replied honestly. "Tabitha, when I think of how empty my life was before you arrived, I was just existing, not living. My hands bled from work that felt meaningless because I had no one to share it with, no one to build for. And now?" she prompted softly. "Now everything has purpose," Nathan said, placing his hand gently on her still flat abdomen. "Every fence I mend, every field I plow, every nail I hammer, it's all for us. For our family." April brought new growth and renewed energy. Nathan and Tabitha decided to expand Nathan's cabin for their primary residence while converting Tabitha's into a proper clinic where she could treat patients. With the improved loan terms from Wilson's bank, they were able to purchase additional livestock, 2 milk cows, and a small flock of sheep to add to their chickens and horses. News of their expected child spread through Willow Creek, bringing a steady stream of well-wishers and patients to their door. Tabitha's gentle skill had earned her the community's respect, and Nathan found himself regarded with new consideration as both a successful farmer and the husband of the town's most trusted healer. By midsummer, Tabitha's pregnancy was clearly visible, a gentle curve beneath her dresses that Nathan found endlessly fascinating. He worried about her continuing to work, but she insisted that moderate activity was beneficial. "Women have been having babies while working fields since the beginning of time," she reminded him when he tried to take a basket of laundry from her hands. "I'm pregnant, not infirm." Still, he found ways to lighten her load without making her feel coddled, rising earlier to have breakfast ready, ensuring water buckets were always filled, taking over the heavier garden work without comment. One warm August evening, as they sat on their porch watching fireflies dance over the fields, Tabitha suddenly took Nathan's hand and placed it on her rounded belly. Under his palm, he felt a distinct kick. "That's our child," he whispered in awe. "Strong already." "Like their father," Tabitha said, leaning her head against his shoulder. Nathan looked out over their land, the thriving crops, the grazing animals, the 2 cabins connected by a well-worn path. So much had changed in a year. The irrigation ditch that had once seemed an impossible task now efficiently watered flourishing fields. The home that had felt empty and silent now resonated with purpose and love. "I never thought I could be this content," he admitted. "After the war, I convinced myself that loneliness was just the price of survival, that connections meant vulnerability." Tabitha nodded understanding. "And after Thomas died, I told myself I didn't need anyone, that independence meant strength." "We were both wrong," Nathan said, drawing her closer. "Gloriously wrong," she agreed. Their daughter was born on the first snow of November, a robust, loud-lunged child with Nathan's blue eyes and a dusting of Tabitha's auburn hair. They named her Elizabeth Hope Anderson for Nathan's mother and for the feeling that had sustained them through their struggles. Nathan paced nervously outside their bedroom during the birth, only to be summoned by Mrs. Wilson, now a firm friend after 12 hours of labor. When he entered, the sight of Tabitha propped against pillows, tired but radiant, holding their tiny daughter, brought him to his knees beside the bed. "She's perfect," he whispered, afraid to touch the small bundle. "She is," Tabitha agreed, "and she wants to meet her father." She carefully transferred Elizabeth to Nathan's trembling arms. Looking down at his daughter's face, Nathan felt his heart expand beyond anything he'd imagined possible. This tiny person, this miraculous combination of himself and Tabitha, represented everything he'd never dared hope for. "I'll never let anything hurt you," he promised softly. "Either of you." That winter passed in a blur of midnight feedings, first smiles, and the constant wonder of watching Elizabeth discover the world. Despite the cold and occasional hardship, Their home remained warm with love and purpose. By spring, Tabitha was ready to resume her medical practice, with Elizabeth often nestled in a basket nearby while her mother tended patients. Nathan continued expanding their farming operation, his once bleeding hands now strong and sure, capable of both the toughest labor and the gentlest touch when cradling his daughter. On the anniversary of Tabitha's arrival, Nathan took her to the spot where they'd first met the field where he'd been digging irrigation with bleeding hands, and she'd appeared with her wagon of possibilities. "A year ago, I thought I knew what hard work was," he told her as they stood hand in hand, Elizabeth sleeping in a sling against Tabitha's chest. "I thought calluses and blood were the measure of effort." Tabitha smiled. "And now?" "Now I know that working until your hands bleed is nothing compared to the work of opening your heart," Nathan said. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done and the most rewarding." "For me too," Tabitha admitted. "Coming here, starting over, I thought I was just seeking independence. Instead, I found partnership." Nathan lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the palm that had so tenderly bandaged his wounds and brought their daughter into the world. "Your touch healed more than my hands, Tabitha. It healed my soul." As the Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nathan Anderson looked at his wife and daughter and the land they'd fought for together. His home no longer felt like a place of solitary labor and quiet desperation. Instead, it pulsed with life and possibility, a true reflection of the love that had transformed everything. The cowboy who had once worked until his hands bled had found something worth far more than calluses and strain. He had found a home made alive by love, by family, and by the gentle touch of a woman brave enough to plant roots in the wilderness of his heart.